kind of an interesting topic. You know, you think, what do you do different when you have high feed cost when you would have low feed cost? And sometimes it's really kind of the same story. But it's more painful when the feed costs are higher, right? And so you have to get tougher at what you do. And so what I'm going to do today is just give you a quick overview of Smithfield Foods and Murphy Brown, because you got to have some feel for the perspective a person comes, because to understand their bias. And that's exactly what I'm trying to share with you, is what is our bias and perspective, and then share with you and springboard off some of the comments that Chris made relative to the financial impact and the sensitivities of our business, those things that change the financial impact, and what are those changes, and then some around some industry trends, benchmarks, and then I'm going to end with what I'm going to call 6 controllable factors. Controllable meaning things that you can do something about, and no matter how smart we get, Chris, market prices in corn and live pigs, that's somebody else's job. It's my job to get really good at pork production and having people do their jobs well. So to begin with, many of you are probably aware that Smithfield Foods is a Fortune 100 company listed on the New York Stock Exchange, has about 50,000 employees working in 12 different countries, or 36, sell in 36 countries with 12 brands, and annual sales is this past year is about $14 billion. So today we view our competition as Hormel, and also Tyson would be what we would view as our competition as well. And in our portfolio, we list these as number ones in position. I'll talk about each of these a little bit. We're the world's largest pork producer, the world's largest, or the U.S. biggest processed pork company. We're also the world's largest processor and the number one market share in Europe. And when you look at Smithfield, right here at this, right here, nope, no pointer here, so we'll just go without that. When you look at Smithfield at 31%, that's what we're killing as a percent of the inventory. And then you look at the next one being Tyson at 19% of the inventory. So in essence, we're a little, almost twice the size of the next competitor. And then notice in this upper corner there, the other segment is 23%. So there's still a lot of small packers. At the same time, I think it's important when you think about that, and I think maybe to come back and reflect on what Chris said earlier, where does the pork processing capacity fit? You really have to ask yourself, how many of the pork processing plants have 2 shifts that are not yet 2 shifting? And so you could really increase the amount of kill by adding a second shift. And I love the background music. I don't know if somebody's trying to tell me something or not. And this is our brand portfolio. The U.S. brands listed there, and they're listed from most profitable down. And so our most profitable brand in the U.S. is Farmland, followed by Smithfield, and then Eckrich, and then the Armour Group and John Morrell. So those are the 5 brands you probably more commonly hear about. Curly's is a brand of ribs that when you go into Arby's and places like that, those are curly ribs oftentimes you consume. And then you get into some of the more specialty brands on the bottom, plus the international brands that are there. The other thing that's interesting to note is when you look at our distribution network, in essence, Smithfield Foods can deliver to 80% of the U.S. population overnight. Now, if you look at that map, where would you say the weakness is? Probably West Coast. Oh, thank you much, Steve. I've got a $75 pointer in my bag that I didn't bring up with me that really has a nice green light on it, right? And you notice here, the weakness of this is these western states areas. We have good market penetration here and in the Midwest and in the West, and typically in the West, that's a ship product. So you have large populations, and that's far and away the furthest from our market segment. So when you look at market leadership within Smithfield's 9 leading consumer categories, notice across these hams, smoked pork, specialty hams, frozen meatballs, number 1 in those 4 categories. And then you get over here, we're number 2. But look at the dollar signs under these. Like hams is a $560 million market, where packaged meat over here $745 million. And so obviously more and more companies are trying to add value and trying to push to that added value side where the money tends to be, and less fresh meat and more packaged and specialty meats. This is a good overview of our hog production segment. In essence, starting with about 850,000 sows with operations in 12 states. We produce about 17 million pigs, and about 2 million of those are sold external, and most of those go into the California market. And then giving us about a 50% vertical integration. And if you're not familiar with those numbers, other companies, Seaboard would be close to, I don't know, Seaboard folks probably in here, about 80-85%, I would guess. They're probably the highest, and then you get to the Cargills of the world, they might be in the 25-30% area. So when you look at pork producers, in essence, our part of the pie would be about this 18% of the U.S. production. And then when you add up the next single competitor with Seaboard, Christians, Prestige, and Group, those groupings equal our amount. So in the truest sense, we have pretty dramatic lead on growth, on size. But the important part is it's easier to be big than it is to be good. And so that's our single challenge, is to say, how do you take that size of system, be world class, and be most competitive? And so in our case, we have the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the objective is to always say, how do you get more of the bad to be better? So Murphy Brown was put on this company, it's been about 11 years, and often people say, why did they name it after a sitcom? Well, I tell them because Candice Bergen was a vegetarian, and it was in honor of her, who happens to play the lead of that. But in the truest sense, Wendell Murphy was the founder of the Murphy Family Farms, and Greg Brown was the person that helped Smithfield get into pork production. Thus, the name Murphy Brown was put on the company as a way of differentiating it from the branded products. So when you look at the operating divisions, our Eastern group has 525,000 sows. The West group that I work with has 340,000 sows. And then our international group having sows in Mexico, Romania, and Poland. And when you look at our U.S. operations, what you see is we have a different kind of business plan depending on the location. Say our Utah business is all company owned, with a lot of the pigs, market pigs, moving to the West Coast and some weaning pigs moving to the East. And then we bought Premium Standard Farms a few years ago as well. That's a company-owned facility. But the Murphy part of our business was contract operations, sows on the peripheral edge, moving weaned or feeder pigs to the Midwest and contract managed. So those principal two strategies of pork production. So to follow up on some of the things that Chris said, he showed you some corn pricing. And what I've tried to do here is show you corn pricing going back to about 2010. And we all know this really ramped up. But I think sometimes when you think globally, it's a little bit different, particularly when you look at this black line, the black line being China. So you can see the U.S. market, being the red line, has fallen off, but the China market has consistently been about $3 a bushel higher than the U.S. market. Okay, and so we all know, and Chris, I'm glad to know that it's our turn to eat some lunch of those guys in the ethanol business, because I've been smelling their wrong end for a long time. And then we get a product called DDGs that we have to feed and use and think it's great stuff. So the thing that I wanted to communicate to this group, just to have a feel for it, is 25-cent change in corn price is equal to about $1.60 a hundredweight cost of production difference. So when the ethanol business started to take off in about 2006, our cost of production as an industry went up about $20 a hundredweight. So all of a sudden, it's costing you $50. Now the market didn't keep up with that, and so and you have this giant hole. Yeah, we're making money, a little bit of money now, but not enough to pay all the losses you had before that time. So you had a 6-foot hole, and now you've got about 4 foot of dirt back into the hole. So it's a catch-up business. And as an integrator, obviously, we have distinct advantages over just being a pork producer. And the other thing I think you need to keep in mind is if you look at feed cost, we all know that feed is the biggest single cost, but did we recognize that feed cost as a percent of total cost has gotten higher in the past couple of years? In the past, it was about 60% of cost. Now it's 70% of our costs. Okay? And so it's a bigger piece of the market than it has ever been. So these key relationships, we know we can't do much about feed cost, but feed cost, this change here, when you use that sensitivity, you got to change livability by 2.2% to break even. Now that's a big change in a system our size, moving at 2%. And another one would be is this same feed cost, that would be equivalent to 17 points on feed efficiency. That's a big change. Another way of looking at that would be about a 5% change in actual number, or 17 points. And then a half a pig more weaned per sow farrowed is equivalent to about 1% on finishing livability. Okay, within that finishing livability picks up the feed efficiency number in our sensitivity estimates. And typically for 1% change in finishing livability, it affects our feed efficiency about 5 points. And so you have that ongoing relationship. Our market weights, 10-pound more market weight is equivalent to about 6 points on feed efficiency from a sensitivity standpoint. So the reality of what we're dealing with today is that market weights are going to continue to get higher and higher. So we talk about the spaces that are going to be built. Part of that is we want pigs to go to heavier weights. Our sow productivity is going at a greater rate. And so they're already excessively crowded. So some of it's relief. Some of it's maintenance of business. And that's part of the reason that growth is occurring. So the critical message I want to leave with you here, and it's not new, but to reinforce, to say the 3 things that drive our business: livability, growth rate, and number weaned. Not pre-weaning mortality, not feed efficiency, not pigs per sow per year, not medication per pig. It's these 3 things that are the 3 big legs of our business. Okay, and so the other thing I wanted to do is share with you some industry trends. The National Pork Producers Group has funded a project in cooperation with AgriStats. And AgriStats, many of you are probably aware, is an industry benchmarking service that people participate in. There's about 50, 55 people in that market. And of those folks, they represent about 45% of the North American industry. And so what we've been able to do in those is to identify pork producers, and then we've done some simple regressions of these to look at the slope and then the R-square of the fit of that line. So a couple of things I wanted to point out. First is our litters per sow mated is pretty flat. Number of pig born live, all of us have seen that, haven't we? We got more pigs born live, and that's changing at the rate of 0.2 per sow per litter. Okay? At the same time, number weaned is changing at the rate of 0.17. Both with real high R-squares, pre-weaned mortality, a little lower R-square, and then pigs per sow mated per year obviously going up at about the rate of 0.4 of a pig. Okay? So what that says is sow performance is getting better. And that's the change rate that we're seeing. Now let's look at finishing. And what I've tried to do is highlight in red the R-squares that tend to be a little more predictable. And in essence, finishing mortality, we've had this peak of 2007 where we all experienced circle virus. But look at the industry average at 5%. It's changing at the rate of 1/3% with an R-square of 0.65, with market weights increasing at the rate of 1 pound per year and daily gain going up at 0.03 of a pound. At the same time, feed efficiency is flat, caloric efficiency, being defined as how many calories per unit of gain, is flat. So our feed efficiency industry numbers haven't changed. We've gotten a little better in this area, but it's primarily due to this livability improvement here. Now, taking the agrostats numbers one step further for benchmarking purposes, what I've done in this particular case is gone through the agrostats report and said, by a few of these key indicators, what is the very best number and what is the very worst company, and then what is the top 25. Okay, so the best company today is weaning 27.3 pigs year to date for that 12-month period of time. Okay, and the worst company at 19.1. Think about that. 7 pigs per sow per year difference, or 30% difference in throughput, right? You think about these other measures, look at feed finishing livability, about 6-point difference there, with the top 25 being 4, and feed efficiency difference of 53 points. And then come over and look at feed cost per pound of gain, almost $7 a hundredweight, or about 35% difference between the top and bottom. Now, Chris, when you look at those numbers, that says somebody's going to die. Okay? And you better figure out where you are on that list to be able to survive. So let me maybe move some to feed efficiency, because oftentimes we think about feed cost, we think about feed efficiency, and let me just clearly communicate to you, good feed efficiency, excellent feed efficiency doesn't necessarily mean low cost production. Okay? And oftentimes that gets to be confusing. And so I want to clearly communicate to you that feed efficiency, in my opinion, is a crappy measure of industry standard. It is very much a metric that is not a lead indicator. It's a system indicator, but it's really hard to benchmark and monitor feed efficiency. And it's a marginal metric for benchmarking. It requires extensive standardization to even make the number comparable apple to apple. And so if one says, look at my feed efficiency, 6 points better, that's normal variation in most cases, because what happens are these components influence it. You got to equalize mortality, you got to equalize the dietary nutrient level, you got to equalize, am I comparing mash to pellet in some of them? How about market weight differences? This market's going to 275, this market's going to 255. Am I using paline or no paline? And what was the start weights of the pigs? So when you have a metric that requires 7 key adjustments, you can't effectively benchmark that. Let me show you an example. Let's say, in this case, these are actual numbers come out of one of our locations. They had a plan of 278. He came in and said, looky here. We beat plan by almost 6 points on feed efficiency. But in the truest sense, now we adjust the plan for all those 7 things that I just talked with you about. Now they're 3 points worse than plan. 3 points worse than plan says our cost of production is 36 cents a hundredweight worse than it should be. And we were thinking we were doing good because we beat plan. So my point being, standardization of feed efficiency is an outcome measure, not a lead indicator. Okay? Now, to kind of wind this down, what I want to do is share with you what I would say are 6 controllable factors in pig production. Many of them are probably well understood and known, but not perhaps effectively done. I know we got room for improvement in our system. The first one is wean pig source or flow. And you can identify flow as a sow farm, a mixture of sow farms, whatever that flow is. But here's an example in our system where we take feeder to finish, and this is the best flow and the worst flow in that group. And the averages are distinctly different, and the ranges are pretty similar. But isn't it interesting that these worst pigs over here are better than the best pigs minimum? Okay? Bell curves that are overlapping. Okay, so what that really means is we have a lot of system variation, and flow influences that dramatically. It doesn't matter if you're talking about wean to finish. Again, the same comparable range with this overlap between the minimum and the maximum between the best and worst flows. So what I wanted to communicate to you is when we've taken our data and put it through some really pretty neat statistical analysis using stepwise regression to say, you know, the problem we have in our industry is we have too many damn numbers. And you say, which numbers should I look at? Which ones are the most important ones to look at? If you're going to set up a digital cockpit and say you're going to measure your business, which ones are you going to use? And in essence, what this clearly said to us is one of the most important measures we can have is you better understand flow performance. Because in essence, flow represented 52% of the predicted outcome of that pig. So in essence, everything the guys say, well, I got bad pigs, yeah, that's right, 52% of the effect. The other 48% is how they manage the pigs. So this particular indicator is adjusted here is about 3 times greater than the next most important variable. That's beyond feed source. It's beyond season of the year. It's beyond some of the things we often use as our typical reasons for explaining variance. The next one. Monitor key inputs. Ronald Reagan once said, we trust in the Lord, everybody else we verify. And that's exactly what you're doing here, is we're verifying key processes are being done. The traditional method in finishing is we count the dead and we look at closeouts. And those closeouts, then we say, how do we sort through that mess, right, Neil? How do we standardize those? How do we know we got everything in that bucket right? The thing I want to propose to you is that we've been using this concept for a number of years. We call it standard site concept. And it simply is measuring lead indicators and verify that they're getting done, and that predicts better outcome. And so what you do is you measure things to say, how well are you doing your activity, not necessarily looking at your numbers. Because we'll find ourselves chasing our tail if all we look at is closeouts and weekly mortality. And so what I'm suggesting to you, some examples of lead indicators checked frequently, are things we look at and we walk around and inspect. But what data do you collect? What data do you collect? Those guys walk in the barn, they give them a piece of pink paper, say, oh, I do this, do that. Next week they come back, they say, do this, do that. And there's no connection and there's no database management through that. What I'm suggesting to you is these kind of lead indicators, when effectively done, improve output. And so this gets you upstream. You measure the critical variables of success. Third one, around feed processing. I'm not here to bore you with particle size because all of you know that. But I want to reinforce a couple of real messages about feed processing, because I believe our industry has taken a left turn and screwed up when we started closing down pelleters in our system. Particularly, Chris, at $2 corn, that was a good idea. $6 corn, that's crazy. And I'm going to tell you why it's crazy here. Let's start by looking at some examples of some corn particle size. 15, 20 years ago, we were all talking about 600, 700 microns. That's probably about right in this area here. You can make that flow in mash feed, but you go much lower than that, you have a sticky, gooey mess, right? Feeders don't flow very well. Back when I was living in Kansas, we had a hard time getting Kansas producers to think that they didn't feed corn like they did their cattle. If it wasn't coming out in the feces, it wasn't probably ground right. And so you see this extreme. I'm here to tell you that 100 microns decrease is equivalent to about 5 points on feed efficiency, or $1.40, assuming $6 corn. Now, in a pellet, you don't want to pellet this mess over here, or this mess, because those pellets will fall apart. They won't cook, they won't gelatinize. And today, our objective is to pellet corn at 300 microns. You can't do that and make it mash feed. Okay, it costs you a little bit more to get it there. And also, as we talk about pellets, I've heard every reason why we can't feed pellets. In fact, I've had one of my good sow guys say, pellets kill sows. That's the mentality they're dealing with. That's what we've taught them. That's what they've learned, and they've experienced that with some genetics. So let's talk about pellets. When we talk about pellet quality, we have to redefine what is success here. Again, I think the industry spent too much time thinking that gelatinization or the cooking of starches was improving utilization. The benefit is grinding the corn finer and then ensuring it is in the feeder. Gelatinization is a minor component of the benefit of pelleting. And so we see a lot of pellets that look like this. In the feed industry, we call that pelletized. What that meant was the fines got left in. Okay? And if you ever sold something like this to a dairy guy, you'd have that pellet delivered back on your doorstep. Hog guys, we thought, oh, that's okay. Particularly when you're an integrator, because it didn't cost you as much to make it. And today our goal is to get to this 80% pellet at the feeder. Okay? And you all know how to determine percent pellets. And the thing I want to share with you, with today's corn price, the estimated net financial value is $12 to $13 a ton. Now divide that by 3 for some of you quick veterinarians. That tells you what it's worth in the way of pigs. And the point of that is you can afford today to grind corn finer, especially when you have $6 corn, and pelleting today, just like in Europe, interesting enough, becomes more of the norm. And mash feed will continue to be less and less critical with expensive ingredients. Here's an example of some experiments we've done. Here's mash feed over here. Here's what we've done is we've sorted them out, put the fines back into the feed, and then blended them to a percent fines pellet ratio. And so we had some that were 90% pellets, 70% pellets, 50% pellets. And what you quickly see here is 50% pellets compared to mash feeds, only 5 points. So that's why people turned off their pellet mills, because that's the stuff they were making. They were spending $4 or $5 to make it, and they were getting 5 points on feed efficiency, and pigs were dying, right? Because pigs that eat pellets die. So in our case, by moving from this 50% pellet to 260 to 90% is about a $2.60 head advantage. And my objective in going through the next slides is to take you into saying, okay, help us as your advisors to the farms, make sure they understand there's lots of factors that influence the pellet durability index. One of the best ways to do that is to add wheat or wheat mids, or to add a binder. And in many cases, those are not very cost effective to do so. So you're looking at changing the temperature, reducing the amount of fat, and also changing the production rate. Well, what have we done in the past? We measure everything in our industry and we suboptimize. We reward the feed guy because he can make a ton of feed cheaper. And if he wants to make a ton of feed cheaper, what does he do? Run it through the pelleter faster and the fines go down or go up, right? The net effect is feed efficiency is not as good. The next one to keep in mind is the temperature of that pellet, and very much a linear effect. The higher the temperature, the greater the cooking and the better the pellet durability. Work that comes out of Charles Stark at North Carolina State. The same thing with dye thickness. The thicker the dye, the greater the pellet durability. And also the throughput, the tons per hour being pushed through affected. So what does that give you? It gives you a system to do system optimization around, right? To say what is your quality definition going to be relative to your pelleting adjustments. The other thing to keep in mind, and I'm going to use this primarily as blue line. Let's say I make feed and it comes out of the pellet mill at 70% pellets or 30% fines. This is what happens to it. You see this degradation, and time it gets over here to the feeder or the auger, it's about half what it was when you left the pelleter. Where do we measure pellet quality? Right here. And then what happens? This feed doesn't look so good. So you got to be able to measure it or have methods to measure it so that you know that degradation of the system that you're quantifying that effect. Next point, again, this is fairly elementary, but often overlooked, is feed program implementation. Getting the right diet to the right pig for the right time. Okay? And the first one is that around feeder adjustment. And some work that continues to be done. We spent a long time, 15 years ago, saying, that's just right. What that does is we see a reduction in feed intake, slows down growth rate. When we get this 25 to 50% of pan coverage, pigs eat more, they gain faster. And that's predicated on the stage of growth. And just where you would expect energy shortages, it's even more critical. So it's less critical in the nursery than it is in the late finisher, where energy is very critical. And so in essence, these numbers may be a bit hard to see, but if you were to go through this and say added cost due to wastage, it could be anywhere from $5 to $10 a pig, just by the way the feeder setting occurs. Now another one I thought I would share with you, this is called minimizing feed outages. A feed outage in our definition is when the pigs don't get feed. You know, and so that's an input you're measuring. And there's lots of reasons why they don't get feed. It bridged in the bulk tank, it bridged in the feeder, it didn't get delivered, it didn't get ordered, or we ran out of corn. You know, all the above happen. But the most common one in many cases is because it bridged someplace in the system. So in our system, we routinely monitor feed interruptions to say, how are we doing? And this is within one of our large systems, and you can see this green and orange line bouncing all over. Sometimes you had 30, 40, sometimes 100 interruptions in a week. Now look at this blue line. That's system improvement, which says our feed interruptions have gone down dramatically, saying now the things that give us those hiccups in it, we're more effective in delivering to. So the last area I want to hit on is just the aspect of immunocastration. And obviously this is a sensitive topic because we're talking about another company's product. But I think it's a concept that we need as an industry to say, notice I've used the word evaluate the feasibility for your system. And just let me show you some quick summary numbers from Frank Dunshee at Australia. And he's showing these number of tests and this range. And the key number I wanted to show you is 33 points on feed efficiency with a range of 27 to 39 points on feed efficiency. 7 to 10% improvement in feed efficiency. I don't know of a vaccine, a feed additive, a nutrient that I can do that will do it quite that way. So this technology has amazing promise, but some tough implementation challenges. We did a study, and in essence, our study, we compared it to Barrows, Infravest, and Boers, and in essence, we saw 37-point improvement in feed efficiency, 14% difference. Now, when the good Lord designed the testicle, he put some unique aspects into that for hormone release. And what do? We cut those off and lay them on the slats at about 3 to 5 days of age. And so we lose growth and we lose lean deposition potential. And so when you look at our data, in essence, you see this barrow line being the dark line on feed efficiency. We weighed these pigs every 2 weeks and calculated feed efficiencies. The barrows right here start to separate. Sexual differentiation. When gilts and barrows and boars all start to think different, act different, the barrows start to get fatter, they start to get less efficient, and the Infravest or immunologically treated animals and boars stay the same until you give them the second dose, and then they start to separate out there. So in essence, what you see is the feed efficiency change. And when you look at the summary of these experiments, 11 of them, they average a range of 7 to 11% improvement in feed efficiency. And when you have $5 to $6 corn, and you get a 6 to 10% change in feed efficiency, that's the benefit. So you look at that and say, what does it cost you to buy it, to administer it, the quality assurance, and the failure aspect, and you lay it against these numbers and say, are you going to get a reasonable return? Last one simply to state to you, particularly you folks are the most influential people that call on farmers. Make sure you move your anecdotal comments to robust ways and good ways of making sure the information you leave with them is sound science. That is one of the greatest needs we have and expectation of you as advisors. Make sure your input is scientifically sound. And if I'm not asking you to learn how to do it, I'm asking you to make sure you know somebody that can help you do it so you deliver better answers. I gave up, Neil, on the other one. So in summary, let me just state, focus on growth, livability, number weaned, feed efficiency is not a reliable lead indicator, large amount of variation in the industry, and here are the 6 controllables I'd encourage you to think about. Thank you very much for your attention.